Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. My name is Clara Nevola, and I work for the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO, which is the UK data protection regulator. And this panel is hosted by the ICO. So today we're here to talk about deliberative processes. And if you stayed for the session before this as well, you'll already be warmed up to the topic. This is perfect chapter 2 for that session. So deliberative processes are ways of exploring and designing policies or products in collaboration with the people who will be affected by them. So it's an area in which businesses, policymakers, and academia can really fruitfully collaborate and share experiences. And our aim for this morning with my wonderful panel is to showcase and discuss the importance of listening to user and citizen perspectives and really incorporating them into the design of products and policies, and how this can really bring about privacy by design and transparency. We will explore the approaches to engaging with members of the public and designing with privacy in mind. And perhaps I can start by giving you a bit of a perspective of why would the ICO host a panel of this sort? Why are we interested? So at the ICO, we've long been advocates for deliberative design. The GDPR and the UK GDPR state that as part of a data protection impact assessment, controllers should consult with data subjects, and we've for a long time supported organizations to do so. And in our part of our children design code, we highlight the importance of involving children in the design of products, and we'll talk a little bit more about co-design during the panel. But more recently, we've started looking at not just advocating for these techniques for the organizations that we regulate, but also adopting these techniques in our own work. So as part of our strategic objectives for the next 3 years, we're committed to engaging with communities, particularly vulnerable communities, and understanding better the opinions and perspectives of the citizens and individuals whose data we regulate. This year, in the last year, we've done a program of work both with the Ada Lovelace Institute and with the British Youth Council to understand the perspectives of adults and young people in the UK in relation to biometrics, and we've incorporated that deliberative design directly into the policy on biometrics that we're producing. So in our work at the ICO and in my work, when we want to understand the perspectives of individuals, we turn to experts in deliberative processes to understand from them how we can conduct these activities. And so today on my panel, we have some wonderful experts to share those perspectives with you, and I hope you will be as inspired by them as I was myself. So I'll now turn to them, Anja, Emma, and Marie, to introduce themselves.
Thanks so much, Clara. I'm Anja. I lead the privacy research team for Google, specifically focused on children's research, children's and families research. And I'm excited to talk to you about how we include people in our product development processes, and further how we are going to share that publicly, which was a big focus of the panel before as well. The Privacy Center and the research team that is working on children's privacy and safety is based at the Google Safety Engineering Center in Munich. So that's where the team that does the research globally for Google sit. And it has 2 functions that I just want to talk about quickly before we dive into the questions from the moderator. One is we are doing research to help with product development. And the second, so that's embedded in the product teams. And the other function is to engage more broadly with other organizations that are doing research with children and families. So that could be academic institutions, NGOs, as well as regulators. And there we're working across a variety, and I'll give examples later on as well.
Thank you, Anja. Thank you, Clara. I'm really happy to be here and share the panel with you. I'm part of the OECD. I work at the Open Government, Civic Space and Public Communication Office unit, and what we do, if you know the OECD, we are an organization of 38 member countries, and we develop standards in a wide areas of issues. We collect data, and we also share as a platform for knowledge sharing between our members and partners, institutions, and countries. Part of our work, or the work that I work, because I know that there have been different colleagues from the OECD, but we focus on how public administration should function, how public communication should be, public administration should become more open, more transparent, more accountable, and how this can lead to more trust, as I will explain later, and also how public institutions can be more effective in the way that they provide public services. One of the ways that we do this is by working with the countries to develop approaches for citizens' participation. So they are used to engage with citizens, and they can implement several methods to do so. So I'm happy to share some of our experience here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Clara, for the invitation, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you, Anja and Emma. Hi, everyone. So my name is Marie Potel. I'm the founder of Amurabi, which is a legal innovation studio, and also I'm a founder of Fair Patterns, which is a platform that helps the world hopefully getting rid of dark patterns. That means that everything we do at Amurabi and Fair Patterns is actually entirely based on human centricity. What human centricity means is that we start everything we do with user research, obviously. That's our very first step. Then we also implement a lot of neurosciences. We add to that plain legal language, which is also a lot about knowing who you're talking to. And then, of course, we created our own user testing lab that enables us to measure very precisely, not just understanding, but also memorization of a given content, satisfaction of the users after having read a privacy notice. And yes, that's possible to have happy users after reading a privacy notice. So as you will have understood, understanding the users, including them, so not just listening to users, but also co-creating with users is absolutely central in everything we do. So I'm super happy to be with you here.
Thank you. So I think we'll start with the very first question, which is, why would you do this? Why would you engage with citizens, with users, with individuals? So I'll turn first to Anja to talk a bit about the perspective from Google of why does your work exist?
Thank you. Yes. So to give a bit of context, I sit in the user experience research department that comprises a bunch of methods that are data science, as well as qualitative research and other quantitative research methods. We engage with people who use the products because it's vital to our product development process. We need to understand two things. We need to understand from our research function that informs the product building of what is it that we should even be building? So what are the right things to build, specifically in the context of privacy safety in my area? And then the second part of the research that we're doing and why we're working with people is how are we building the things that we're doing in the right way? So what should we be building, and what are the things, how can we build it the right way? And in both of those research processes, we are including people in that. That goes all the way from talking to experts and building on existing research from a lot of the people even in the room, to all the way to consulting with organizations that may know more in a given topic, all the way to very foundational research methods that are very playful in nature with kids, to final usability testing. So it runs the gamut of the entire product development cycle. That's where research is included. And again, that's quantitative and qualitative in nature. At Google, we also, just to give you an overview of how research is embedded at Google product teams and how they're building products, it's an embedded research function. Some companies have centralized research functions where the product teams, so the PMs, the designers, the engineers, will have a research ask that they come up with, and they can then go to the research function to say, can you please give me an answer on this one question I have? Google has an embedded product research function. That means that the researchers are part of their product unit. So they are crucial in developing the product strategy with them because they're not just waiting reactively for questions that are coming to them, but they're also actually asking questions and pushing product strategy in the right direction. They can do that because they're embedded. So that's really important for me to highlight here. And then we have horizontal and embedded ones. And the kids and family function is a horizontal research team that has influence across multiple research teams and product teams across Google. The focus on kids and families really came about over time And I would like to say that a big part of that was a shift in perspective and more of a push on a European level, and building products from Europe, where the team is based in Europe and was saying, like, hey, wait a minute, we're not including the kids' perspective enough in these products that we're building. As a lot of is coming from a parental perspective, from maybe control perspective, but it's very little coming actually from kids themselves. And so we said, well, wait a minute, if that's what we're going to be doing, we need to be able to talk to them, because we need to understand how they are thinking about the things that we're working on. Specifically when it comes to privacy, we can't equate that they know the same things. We know from very much existing research that children of young ages don't understand commercial privacy, so we need to include them, and we need to understand how we can make that all understandable to them. Overall, there's about 30 researchers at Google focused on kids and families, so there is in various different areas, as well as in EdTech. And in kids and families, we are focusing, my team is focusing on the respect pillar. Google has 3 pillars, similar to the Better Internet for Kids: protect, respect, empower. And my team is working on the respect aspect. So that's all understanding of privacy settings, understanding of data settings, digital literacy in general, as well as reporting functions for when you have unwanted contact from someone, or you've seen unwanted content that you don't want to see, and helping with digital literacy understanding of newer technologies that we believe make the internet safer, such as password management or passkeys, that very often children do not have the tools and the knowledge to understand that, and they very often don't have the parents or the teachers who can tell them how to use this. So that's what our role is really in this. And I could go on, but I want to pass it on, because I also want to later on share more about some specific research projects and how they found their way into the product, and so that you can see what the general process is that we are pursuing.
Thanks, Anja. And so still on the question of why, to pass to Emma and talk a little bit about why OECD is focusing it on why does the OECD advocate for organizations to engage with citizens in public decision making?
Well, I'm going to respond may sound obvious, but when we work with countries and we work with public officials in particular, it's not that obvious. Citizen participation is a key cornerstone for democracy. It allows for institutions to create more inclusive and effective policies. It leads for a more transparent, legitimate, and accountable government, and it also helps to increase trust in government. And today, something that is facing governments is especially the low level of trust. A recent survey that we did with OECD member countries, we found out that around 40% of the respondents to the survey, they do not trust their national government, and less of a third, they think that they have a say on government activities and procedures. And what is even more worrying is that only 46% believe that the government is open. So citizen participation can support or can come to help institutions to solve complex problems that they face today, that don't necessarily they have the expertise or the knowledge to face these problems. They also help to take better decisions and increase the quality of the public services that they are delivering, because they know exactly what citizens are demanding and are needed. What is also important is that it's good for inclusion and diversity, in the sense that when you open citizen participation processes and when you design it in a good way, you are making sure that you are going to get the inputs of all those stakeholders or citizens or CSOs that are working or that feel somehow touched by that particular topic. What is also important for governments is that this increases legitimacy. So it's better in the sense of when I'm implementing a policy. If I build a policy together with citizens or the people of the users of this policy, to put it in the same terms, this will increase the legitimacy, and people will tend to comply with this type of policy because they feel that they were asked if the policy was good for them, they were aware of the impact that this could have, and they are also know and participated on the expected results of the survey. So we are working with the countries, member and partners, to try to encourage them to change the culture of the public administrations in the sense of being able to be more open to the inputs of citizens. And this is why we created the OECD guidelines on citizens' participation, in which we established 10 steps. Some of them are related to what was mentioned in the panel before, and is first, when you develop a participatory process, you need to understand the issue. You need to understand what is the expected results that you want from the participatory processes, because not all of them will get you to the same results. You also need to take into consideration the type of stakeholders that you want to involve in a specific step of the process. You need to know the times, because something that was mentioned in the panel before is that these processes takes time. It's not one day that I meet with people and then the decision is taken. This requires discussions. This requires several times of putting the different positions one against the other to build a consensus regarding them. They also require financial resources, digital resources. You need to have a public communication plan, because if people are not aware of these processes, how are you going to be open to participate? And you also need to evaluate the process. You need to have an assessment if the process was well done, when there was the failures, in order to not repeat the same mistakes in the past. So we need to be, and what we say to government officials, because we see it a lot, is that participation has become the good thing to do for governments. This is a requirement for a lot of funds that come from international organizations or from the EU, that says you need to do your strategic plan if you do a citizen participation process. But then it becomes a tick-the-box exercise. They just do it just to say, we did it, but not meaningful. And if you don't think about the process as a meaningful way, then people would not trust the next process. So you need to understand that there's not one method that is better than the other. There's not one process that will solve all the issues, but then you need to understand what is the issue at stake in order to decide what is the process that you want to carry out.
Thank you. And I think that shows kind of the various reasons why you might do it, ranging from it makes your product or your policy stronger, right down to, well, we're doing it because we have to do it. So that takes us to the next questions, which are kind of, who are we involving and how are we involving them to avoid that situation where you're just doing it because you have to or because it looks good. So to turn to Marie and talk about the who of the who are we engaging with, one question that we grappled with quite a lot at the ICO is that the technical stuff is complex, the data protection law is complex. Some of the questions that we wanted to answer, I think you and the audience would have found hard to answer, and we really struggle with understanding who and how can we engage with people. So is it possible to engage meaningfully with people on very technical topics?
Absolutely. The good news is that, yes, absolutely, it's completely possible and it is desirable. So I guess it's all about debunking the myth that law, legal concept, privacy concepts would be too complex to be explained in a meaningful, simple and plain way to citizens, users, including kids and teens. This is urban legend, honestly. This is, we're proving the contrary every single day, and we've been doing that for 5 years now with measurable results. So just to give you a very basic example, we worked with the French Data Protection Authority a couple of years ago already with teenagers and kids as young as 8 years old. And we demonstrated that it is perfectly possible to explain to an 8-year-old and to measure the understanding. So to explain to them what is digital privacy. I completely agree with you, Anja, by the way, that they fail to understand commercial privacy, but they do understand what privacy means. They express it in the cutest way, by the way, when they're 8. But they say it in their own words, like, well, it's the things that I don't want everybody else to know, just mommy, daddy, and my close friends. Well, they do understand the concept of privacy. What they fail to understand, for example, is the company behind the game they play online. This is the bridge we have to the gap we have to bridge, sorry. So what we do is a combination of very strong user research to really understand, well, what is it that they can grasp and what are the gaps to bridge. And then we can totally explain to very young kids what is targeted advertising, for example. So to do so, we work with child psychologists, for example, and lawyers and designers. And we created a storytelling exercise that we ran during a workshop at the CNIL, the French Data Protection Authority. And the result after the workshop could be measured in terms of understanding. And that actually led to model interfaces that are available online under Creative Commons license. But yes, I think, it's really important to realize that legalese, it doesn't have to be this way. I know the legal industry has, pushed it over and over again, but it is completely possible to explain, again, complex legal and privacy concepts. Access right, for example. You can say it very plainly. And the good news as well for 2023 is the ISO norm that is going to be released any day now. They said before the end of May, so this is really imminent. And what's great about having an ISO norm on plain language is that regulators, but also judges, will be able to have a reference about what's plain, what's accessible to users, and what's not. So I think definitely it's a big yes.
Thanks. And the other thing to consider when you're looking at who to engage with is what barriers may those people face in participating in this engagement. So are the people who are coming forward the same people you want to engage with? And I wondered, Emma, if you could share some of the findings that the OECD has around barriers that citizens face when taking part in government consultations and engagement.
Thank you, Clara. Yes, I would divide the barriers from two perspectives. One would be from the government perspective, so how citizens perceive the government in order to engage. So the first thing that people will say is like, is this really going to bring something differently? And it has to do with the resistance to change of the public administration or of public officials, because at the end they are built from public officials. And the barrier that we see that is the biggest one is especially the change of culture, how citizens and public officials need to understand that this is a new way of doing policy, a new way of delivering public services that is not that easy to understand because public officials are afraid of doing something different to what they are used to. They are afraid of the sanctions that they can get if they step a little bit away of the legal framework. So this is something that is extremely important when we talk to countries, and this is linked to sometimes the lack of political will, in the sense that, again, it is mentioned openly that yes, we are going to do this, but at the same time, you also have the other discourse in which no, we are afraid of what citizens can raise in a participatory process. We are afraid of what they are going to decide, and if they decide this, it's going to be completely opposite to what we actually as government we intend to. So sometimes the lack of political and commitment of the highest level is a big barrier for these processes. Linked to this, I think that you mentioned, Maria, we also need to demystify a little bit what citizen participation is in some countries. And I'm going to mention some of the things that we have, phrases that we have got in when we talk to public officials. The first thing that they will say, for example, is like, but why do I need to engage with citizens? I was elected by them, so I know better what they need. I also got ones, they are not capable of understanding the complexity of their issue, so there's no need for us to involve them. We also got why to call them is they are just going to come and complain, so what we'll have is a list of grievances instead of a list of solutions. And the best one that I got was why I need to disclose the information, for example, of my salary of a public official, because I don't want my wife to know how much I earn. So you have like all these myths from the public officials, so they are extremely afraid of engaging with citizens. And linked to this is also the lack of knowledge or of understanding of why citizens' participation is useful. They don't know. Nobody take the time to inform them of why it is important. As I mentioned before, they just see as a requisite in a document in order to get some funds, but they don't actually believe on the process. Something that we see today a lot, and is sadly is increasing in a lot of countries, is a limited civic space for participation, in the sense that citizens are afraid of participating. They are afraid of some of the retribution that they can get if they participate. We see how journalists are being more and more sent to prisons because they have make opinions about someone or a public official or a politician. We see that there's limited or restrictions on some fundamental freedoms, such as freedom of expression, assembly, of association. Today I got the data that Cívicos found that 3.2% of the population worldwide lives in countries that are considered open, which means that this is extremely worrying for democracies worldwide. But I don't want to put all the blame on the governments. There's also a blame on us, on citizens, to participate on this process. And I would like to ask to the audience on how many participatory processes have you participated in your life as citizens? Have you ever participated in, for example, a participatory budget? Have you provided comments to the draft? I think I only saw 1, 2, yeah. So I think that we're around 50 and only 5, so 10% of the auditorium have participated in this type of processes. So we, as citizens, sometimes we lack the motivation to participate. We sometimes do not have the time or the resources to do so. So this is something that we mentioned to the governments on how you need to encourage participation. So ensure that, as was mentioned in the panel before, you get some retribution, either monetary or personal. That you feel concerned about the topic, and that you come and participate directly. Because right now what we are seeing with some of the deliberative processes is that these are the lotteries, in the sense that I take a sample of citizens to participate, and they participate, but are they participating really because they want to participate, or they were participating because they were chosen to participate, which is completely different in the involvement that they will have. So this is thing that we're working with the countries in order to know how we can solve some of these barriers.
Thank you. And yeah, as a public official myself, I can relate to some of those challenges, maybe not hiding my salary for my partner, but certainly the having to work through the fear of what happens when you ask people, but maybe we can come back to that later. So the next point that I would like to bring to you is kind of how do you understand what people are saying once you ask them? So are you asking the right questions, and are you hearing the right things? So I wondered, Anja and Marie, whether you have perspectives you want to bring from your practices of co-design and how you really truly listen and understand.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good one, because especially for privacy topics, often kids and teens will reiterate what they've been hearing from their parents. And so that's sort of sometimes very often a dominant narrative. So we're seeing sometimes a discrepancy between what people are saying and what they're actually thinking. So what we try to do a lot is a lot of playful interactive research methods that really help us get to the bottom of what people are thinking about things. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this. We have something that we call a snowball fight that we're doing when we're trying to understand if kids and teens actually grasp certain concepts, yes or no. And so what we do for that, for example, is we write down the words on pieces of paper in a group of, we're doing a lot of research in schools, so among a classroom. Everybody gets a piece of paper, they throw it at each other, it's for younger kids. And then at some point we say stop, and one person has to open their piece of paper and explain to the other people in the room what it is that they have written on, that is written on their paper. And that helps us understand, do they understand certain concepts? What are the words that they're using to describe them? And then in turn, what are the words that their classmates are guessing that they're trying to describe? And we use that very often when it's about wordsmithing specific words that we need to do in our product to be able to understand how these come across. That ranges from cookies all the way to a recent example of that found its way in the product is abuse reporting and how that happens. We realized from our data that there were fewer reports filed by younger people, even though they're the most vulnerable group online. And so we tried to understand why that is. It's because we were using the wrong words. So now we fixed that. And now we got the number of reports that we expected, for example. Similarly, we also know that our privacy text sometimes can be quite dry and not really engaging for younger people. So we needed to first make them engaging, similar to a process that what Marie was mentioning. We started with visualizing them a little bit more. And for the younger kids, what helped us there was an activity that's a drawing activity. It's very simple. We we asked questions and asked them, what is privacy? What does it look like? And there we were able to understand, are they drawing something fuzzy, something colorful? Are they drawing something that's an animal, a person? Is it a thing? And through a semiotic analysis of about 300, 400 drawings, we were able to crystallize some of the elements that would help younger kids think of digital privacy on one hand, and secondly of, this is something I should read, this is actually for me. And where we landed, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's in the product in over 100 countries, is the privacy panda. So that's an animal that signposts that this is privacy information for younger kids. Why is it the privacy panda? We realized it needed to be an animal, and I'll give you a little bit of a maybe background information of how we make those decisions, so you can see that my job is pretty cool, I think. We had to define what animal is it going to be. And of course, it can't be a controversial animal. We first had lots of dogs, lots of cats, but we couldn't do that because kids said, like, what if someone doesn't like a cat or doesn't like a dog? And we're like, oh, sorry, didn't think of that, thought they universally liked. And then it had to be an animal that works well with Google Colors. So you're a little bit limited on the colors already. And it had to be an animal that also can stand on two legs, at least, and look good, because we needed to be able to make it look good in certain contexts. And so eventually that was why we chose a black and white panda. So that's for younger kids to understand the privacy information. And then for older teenagers, we realized what was holding them back from understanding our privacy information was their readability was not low enough, not low grade enough. So we made it easier to understand, and it was also too long. No one wants to read a long text. They want to be able to understand very quick information. So what we did is we put out a teen privacy information in Q&A format. That's the questions that we heard in school classes, where we really asked them, write down the most important questions you have for Google on data privacy. And we collected them, and I guess, again, that was done with over hundreds of kids, of teenagers, I should say. And we realized the types of questions and the type of very clear answers we needed to give them so that they feel comfortable and confident. And so that's the teen privacy Q&A that you can also find. That's also live in over 100 countries and 100 languages, I think. So those are the ways in which we are trying to make sure that we find the way in the product for the privacy information that we want kids and teens to understand.
Thank you so much. I love everything I'm hearing. So as you said, and as probably the audience knows already, there is a real science behind user research. It's not like going to people and, tell me, what do you think? Is this clear enough? Absolutely not. So just to give you a bit of concrete examples as well. There are a number of exercises that you can totally easily do with users, kids, teens, adults as well. A very good exercise is brainstorming to make, that's a great way to assess what they really understand and how they think about a given issue. So brainstorming is really creating a problem, a fake problem, and making them imagining a situation about that problem and how it could go really, really wrong. So it's a bit of design fiction as well. So that works really, really well in privacy context. There are also very simple exercises like sentence completion. We use that a lot in user testing. You know, you ask the question, how do you know what they're saying? How do you understand what they're saying? Well, there's the user research phase, but there's obviously user testing. That's absolutely critical. A very simple test is the close test applied to a text. So if you transpose the close test, to a legal content, basically you remove one word out of 4 or one word out of 5 randomly. You give the users 5 seconds to fill in the blanks. And the more right answers they can guess, the more intuitive the text is. And this, you know, intuition is super important because it means that it's not just clear, it's also something that will resonate with users and that will create hopefully ownership. The other point I wanted to make was that, you know, it's great to try to understand what users are saying and to measure it through user testing. But what we found actually the most efficient is co-creation with users. So we did that, for example, for a number of clients in the video game industry. We can mention King, for example. We recruited a number of users in the UK through a panelist, limiting biases and having the right selection criteria, of course. And then we gave them a very simple UX toolbox that they could use very, very easily on a mirror board, basically, with buttons, very simple UX design elements. And we gave them the mission in small groups to literally create their ideal privacy policy. So we had 3 groups of users, about 8 participants in each groups. They came across brilliant ideas, I have to say. And then, they voted for the best solution in their opinion. And this sort of prototype, co-created prototype, was one of the bases that we used to actually create the final version, which is the King Privacy Saga, which is entirely in plain language, which mirrors the experience in the game itself. That's a very important element. If you want to create engagement, the privacy content has to provide the same experience as the site itself or the product or the service itself. That's really a key point. We even created a small quiz in the end with the in-game assets. So that's just an example.
Thank you both. So to kind of conclude this journey of why and how, the final bit I wanted to talk about was what's in it for the citizen, or how can we get additional benefits out of the process. So Emma, turning to you and thinking about what you were saying earlier, looking at the audience, many of whom haven't taken part. Of those who have, how can we make sure that it's a positive experience and that they might want to do it again? So how can we get most benefit out for the citizen?
It's really important because at the end, this is the ultimate goal of the process is that we need to go back to the citizens. As you go back to the users when you have a final product, government should also go back to the citizens and explain how their inputs were taken into account, and more especially why they were not taken into account. This is what we call closing the feedback loop, in the sense that you participate, you provide your input, you took time and resources to go, you provided your input, how the government took it into account to reflect it in the public policy. This is extremely important because it's the only way that citizens and stakeholders will continue to believe in the process. Because if they only see the final result, and for one reason what they propose is not there, and nobody explained to them why it's not there, they will stop participating, because they will ask themselves, what is in there for me? If I took time, I went there, I gave a proposal, and I don't know how this was taken into account. Also, what is extremely important is the evaluation of the process. All these processes needs to be evaluated, needs to be monitored, needs to be evaluated to understand what didn't work and how we can improve the next one. And asking the citizens what they thought about the process is important, because I'm not only taking into account their point of view to improve a policy, but also if I want that this become institutionalized in public policy, the participatory process. I need to understand what I'm doing wrong as a government, and sometimes we don't know. So this is important as well. And what is important, and we're just discussing this, and like for the conference as well, is that the government need to take into consideration all the diversity that there is in a country, in the sense that we need to take into consideration those that have physical disabilities, how they can, for example, participate in a process. We need to take into consideration the digital divide that there is in society. We assume that right now everybody has access to a phone and that they will understand and they can, I don't know, fill a survey on the phone and provide comments. But not everybody has this possibility. If you want to have a policy on elderly people, for example, they will not know how to use it. And even some comments that we have from citizens, like sometimes the public official just translate into the digital world what is in the law, for example, and they don't change it in a plain language that everybody can understand. And not only on the simplicity of the language, but there's some countries that you have more than one language, or that you have dialects. And I cannot forget in those countries, for example, those that have indigenous groups that they speak in different dialects. I also need to try to bring them in. So that the governments think that our societies are extremely diverse is important for these processes to continue. Finally, what we also are saying, and because we're seeing it a lot, is the lack of coordination in government in order to do these participatory processes. We are trying to work with the countries in order to develop the proper legal framework for them, and also the institutional arrangements needed for it. Because sometimes what we see, and this brings what we call citizen participation fatigue, in the sense that sometimes they are being asked so many times to participate in different processes that they get tired at some point because they need to dedicate resources that sometimes they don't have. They need to dedicate time as well. So what we are saying is that if you as a government is planning to have a process on a specific topic, try to combine it with others in order to only do one instead of doing several in time. We also create some economies of scale for the government. And finally, and again, it was mentioned in the panel before, is that these processes needs to be institutionalized. They cannot be one thing that I do today because it's the nice things to do. It's something that I need to integrate in policy making, and the only way of doing this, because of the fears of the public official, is to try to institutionalize them through legal framework, to institutions. But this is the only way that people will have trust that these processes can work, and that at the end will motivate them to participate further.
Thank you. And thinking about that point about citizen engagement fatigue, how can we get the most benefit out of, if we carry out a particular engagement on a particular topic, how can we share the benefits of that? And I wonder, Anja, if you have any reflections on that from the Google perspective.
Yeah, I think what Emma said, specifically closing the loop, making sure that people know what was done with the information that will help them understand how their participation was useful. And similarly, what we are trying to do is we're trying to publicize our findings and socialize them much more to other teams, because I think what also causes fatigue, maybe this is more me speaking with a researcher hat on, is if you're seeing parallel organizations doing the similar research, coming to the same results, and you're wondering, why are you not connected? Why are you not doing this together to save everyone time and energy? So to that respect, that's one of the pillars on which the Privacy Research Center for Kids is founded in Munich. It is around sharing findings and connecting and collaborating on research. And that is both with civil society organizations, as well as regulators, as well as other industry partners. So what we've done, for example, we work with the Safer Internet Centers across Europe on providing research findings for educational materials. We respond regularly with our research findings to consultations from regulators, for example. We've done so in the case of the ICO, when the ICO was asking for input for best practices to share with other companies on research and design practices. We were able to contribute to that, for example. And so little by little, I'm trying to make sure that we are sharing as Google our research findings and our design best practices for other organizations that either may not have the funds or would have to do the research themselves otherwise. So we're trying to do a lot of that sharing, and that's really important to me, and that's where I want to also share with this group that we are open for research collaborations with academics, with researchers on joint research projects, and specifically transparency and privacy are of interest there for us. Yeah.
Thanks. We're about to open up to questions from the audience, so start thinking, and I'll come to you very soon. But just before I do that, Maria, I wondered if you had any perspectives from Amurabi on how to really get the most out of these processes and ensure that they're valuable for the participants and the organizations that carry them out.
Yeah, this is actually one of our obsessions. We always set up KPIs or OKRs or whatever you call them, but really very measurable objectives and results. And we said that upfront at the beginning of every project. We set that collaboratively with our clients, and then we measure the results very precisely in the end, but also over time. And what we see is increased adoption for sure, which is, you're going to tell me this is not very difficult, right? Because before it was like minus 1,000. But still, what we're seeing is, people really and users really notice the difference. They notice when you create a content with them in mind, basically, because it resonates with them. And it's also down to not just the plain language itself, not just the UX design, also the tone of voice that can resonate with them. So they really notice and they value that. And that translates for companies into brand loyalty that we can actually measure. So that's very, very valuable for companies, given how it is difficult to attract new customers. So retaining existing customers is really important. So we're seeing that brand loyalty, and we're seeing also, very spontaneous reactions on legal content that you would have never guessed, like C-suite being really excited about a privacy notice. I know that, it rarely happens, right? I know that, for example, the president of King got really, really excited personally about that, and he posted the King privacy saga on his socials. It's an anecdote, but still, I think it reflects on the shift of mentality, the shift of mindset, that yes, it is possible to engage with complex privacy content. It's not doomed to be walls of text and legalese, and that has a value, not just for the companies engaging in that process, but I believe for society at large.
Thank you. So now over to you. I might exert my privilege as chair and ask that people ask a question rather than make a comment. And I won't insist that everyone speaks once before anyone speaks twice, but I might ask that if you have two questions, you ask one, let other people ask a question, and then if you still have questions, you can come back. So I think we have our CPDP facilitator with a microphone roving around. I think we've got a question up at the front. Over here. It's just, the question is up here. Oh, hello. Oh, sorry, the microphone is there. My mistake. Okay, sorry. Very sorry about that. The first question is up at the front.
Thank you. My name is Velislava Hillman. I'm a visiting fellow at the London School of Economics, and I'm also founder of Education Data Digital Safeguards. Thank you very much for the panel. I have a question for Anja from Google. And of course, my question is, since my research focuses on education, and I'm thinking about Google Classroom. The Five Rights Foundation in the UK conducted research around Google education, and there were quite a lot of issues with regards to the data privacy policies. And we know that last year the Dutch Data Privacy Protection Authority banned Google Classroom, followed previously by the Germans and Denmark, and last April, well, this April actually, this year, the French authorities also proposed banning. I wanted to ask what you have to say about that and the fact that policies are really opaque. It gets even more complicated once children start using the different services that are embedded within the Google Classroom. So they may jump into YouTube, they may jump into Google Maps, and from there, a whole plethora of problems ensuing from there. So with regards to what you're saying about co-design and researching with children, is there anything new, or do you have a comment to make on that? Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. So we do share research findings with Google Classroom, but Google Classroom has a different sign-up mechanism. And so that means that its accounts, so the Google account that you use to sign in to your account and you use it with, has different privacy governances and different privacy practices than the regular Google accounts. And that's because it is facilitated by administrators and by schools rather than by parents and or the actual end users. So from what I know is they are figuring out, or they're going through the process of figuring out how they need to audit themselves on this. I do not work directly on Google Classroom. I share my research findings with them. So I fully understand where you're coming from. Yeah.
I think we had another question over there, and then I think it's, well, let's go over there on the right for now, and then just there, yeah. Thanks.
Hi, so Ruth Boardman from Bird and Bird. So great panel, thank you. I had a question about the time taken to engage and how that impacts on the ability to recruit participants. So to explain the question a bit more, to start with an example, there was research done in the UK a number of years ago looking at attitudes to who should be able to use medical data. And one of the findings was that members of the public were outraged that pharmaceutical companies would ever have their data. They should be banned, which sort of shows the amount of time that you need to engage to explain actually what is essential and where more meaningful discussion can take place. And quite a long while ago, ICO ran initiatives looking at citizens' juries, where they looked at those kind of longer term discussions and looked at how you could get engagement over 2 or 3 days, for example, where you needed that longer discussion. But that must make it really difficult to then get wider engagement with people. So my sort of question is, how do you deal with those longer term projects, and how do you deal with recruitment for that?
Yeah, thanks a lot for your question. So when we do a project, our clients are always in a hurry. It's usually for yesterday. And actually the King example is a good one, because they came to us, I think it was late July, and they wanted everything for end of September. So that was definitely a challenge. I think we managed to deliver in 2 months. The short answer to your question is this: from beginning beginning to the end, and the focus groups in particular, you can, with the right amount of preparation, you can actually get a lot of insights in 2 hours. So you need to engage with users, you have to have them available for only 2 hours. Now, over time, because that's also your question, in the longer term, this is where we struggle a bit more in commercial projects. And so, Emma, I would be interested in hearing your thoughts, because, we do use a test, but then in an ideal world, we would also continuously improve what were delivered after the user testing. And this is where, from a commercial standpoint, it's a bit more difficult to go back, after the project is delivered and paid and everything. They're happy, it's great, but they're not going to do more user research, for example. So, yeah, I would be curious to know how you handle that.
I'll just chime in to finalize on the commercial point, and then I'll pass it right on to you. So what we are doing, we set up longitudinal research projects that are similar to the example from Ofcom, from Children's Digital Media Lives, where we have families that we visit every few months, so we can try to understand what are some of the things that are shifting over time. That's on the qualitative side. On the quantitative side, we have similar tracking surveys, and I'll give you, so that allows us to check shifts over time. One thing that where we are struggling a little bit is when it is about concepts where there's very little understanding in the broad public, and which is, I think, what you're referring to. And one such project that we're working on right now is age assurance and age verification. People don't understand why they have to do this. They don't understand what their benefit for them is, and they don't trust the newer methods that are coming out for their efficacy in many cases. So there's a lot of education, a lot of description that is needed on that, and that takes a longer time. So we started on working on that project January of last year, and they're still in the midst of it. So some of these projects are longer as well.
Definitely time is extremely important, and what we are working with governments is that when you design the public policy, you need to first understanding the topic. You need to clarify when are you going to consult with citizens. At which state of the development of the process are you going to do it, and which methods are you going to use? Because there are some methods that require less time, that you are not obliged to do it right away, and then others will require more time depending on the type of input that you want. For example, if you are discussing the needs of a community, this may require more time because you will need to bring different people from that community for them to decide together to get consensus on the topic in order for them to design what are the needs of that community. Probably the part of the text would not require as much time at the discussion. So what we are saying is that you need to think ahead. You need to be proactive in this. You cannot just go into a step and then when you arrive to the definition of the problem, saying, okay, now I'm going to consult. No, you need to think this ahead of the policy. But more importantly, as Mari was saying, is you need definitely to consult later on the evaluation phase, because this is something that we all forget. We just create the policy, we discuss it, everybody was okay with the policy, but then at the end, we never evaluate the impact of the policy. Does the policy really achieve the issues that we wanted? Did we really got the target that the civil society, that citizens were asking us, were asking the government to do? So we need to get to that point that you need to consult or to engage them at the evaluation phase as well. Because most of the time, public officials and even citizens, we see the policy as something that starts today and ends when it's implemented. But these have a life cycle. And then when it's finalized, implemented, well, you need to reassess to see how you continue to the next one, because you need to take into consideration what you have learned, the new challenges that you are facing, the new situation around the world. Like most of the policies today are changing based on what happened with COVID, based on what happened with the war in Ukraine. So this is something that needs to be done consistently. And is, as I said, it cannot be something that I'm doing today and then I completely forget, and then I do it again when somebody asks me to do it, or because there was a change of government that is, let's say, more open to this type of practices, so I'm doing more, but then someone else changed, and then I don't do them anymore. So it's a way of changing the culture that this needs to be done continuously. And also what is important to point out is that the time gives a lot of legitimacy to the process. I'm not going to mention the country, but I was in a conference the other day, and they were saying there was a decision regarding closing some nuclear plants, and we were, like, citizens and civil society were invited to the process,
once the decision was already taken. So we were only given 1 week to comment on the documents, to discuss the documents, to provide our inputs, and to agree with the inputs when we all knew that the decision was already taken and was already announced by the president in the media. So this type of things, when you do it in a rush way, shows that the government has no commitment on actually getting feedback, but it's just to say that they did a process. And this is actually damaging more the process than to take a step back and say, we need time. If we want to do it well, we need time.
And I would just add for any organizations in the room who are a little bit more, who are a little bit poor on time or money, which is you can be quite creative in these processes and think about who you can piggyback off. So at the ICO, we worked with the Ada Lovelace Citizen Biometric Council. That was a year-long project they'd already carried out to surface biometric issues, and then we reapproached them and in collaboration with them worked with that same council who had already been through that whole process to ask the specific questions that we were interested in. So I've just seen a red timer. Can I just clarify, is the time finished or is that... Okay, we can keep going? Okay, it said stop now, so I was a little bit confused. Okay, I think we have a question right at the back, the person with the beard just behind the mic. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I'm Guilherme Milhora from Leiden University. And the question I have is regarding the first step of all this process when you were selecting who you're going to engage with. Because when we're talking about digital technologies and mainly those big platforms, we're talking about global impacts. And then my worry with that is how do you factor that in so that the impacts are only not considered in centers like Europe or the US, but that you go to the margins, that you make sure that the impacts of those products will not keep like reiterating some sort of historical oppression and historical marginalization of those communities. And before I finish, I just want to thank you. It was an amazing panel.
Thank you for, I'll just respond on how do we make sure we're inclusive. It's true that a lot of our research has historically been in Western markets, more easily accessible markets. The research on age assurance, for example, or other work, we've done it in 8 countries around the world, and we made specific parameters of which countries to include and why. For example, on shared devices, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of work that we're including in India or Brazil, for example, when we're trying to understand more Android-heavy users. So we're making extra efforts for that. And also on the point of inclusivity, previously there used to be going through if parents had signed their children or teens up for research activities. Well, what about those children and teens who actually don't have parents who could sign them up for those things? So we are working with schools to try to also talk to children who may not be otherwise included in that research.
Yeah, that's the inclusion point is extremely important, and thanks for raising it. We're very concerned about it, and in each project, usually the remit is usually global, and clients can be tempted to say, look, yes, we know this is a global project, but actually, given budget constraints, couldn't you take the EU as a reference and consider that it's valid for everyone? The answer is no, and we don't do that. And part of our job is also educating our clients, explaining why. It's not to push sales or anything, it's just proper UX research and user research to actually include a representative selection of users, and we really insist on that. Just to give you an example, we work a lot in the pharmaceutical sector, where most of the big pharma groups are global, and we insist in each project so currently we're designing privacy notices for patients, but also patient consents based on privacy, and we absolutely insist on having a representative selection of users, which means also from a geographical standpoint, and then we also add, gender, age, social background, and we usually do that also thanks to a preliminary state-of-the-art research that shows, for example, the importance of certain factors more than others. To go back to the CNIL example I was referring to earlier, the state-of-the-art research clearly showed that for kids, the determining factor of digital literacy and even literacy at all is less age than social background, as sad as it is. And so we overrepresented lower social backgrounds in our samples of users to create the model interfaces.
Thanks. Emma, do you want to ask? Okay. Yeah, let's see, hands up. We've got 10 minutes, so how many can we cover? Okay, I think person right at the back first, and then we have one up ahead front, and then white blazer on the left, and then we'll see.
Hi, thank you. I'm Nick Ban from AWO. We conducted this study on behalf of the European Commission, on digital advertising, which in part looked at ad settings. And so we did a kind of rudimentary analysis of Google's ad settings, Facebook's ad settings, and Apple's. And, it looking at how easy they were to use, how easy they were to understand and access. And our findings kind of show that Google's ad settings are neither of these things. And we only had ourselves, we didn't do like a kind of survey or anything like that. We just looked at how many clicks you need to get there, what kind of language is used. But obviously this is something that Google is doing, right, as it designs its products. And that's relatively clear. My question is about the results of the research that you do. So not necessarily like sharing best practices and things like that, but how many users understand ad settings, how many users find it easy to access and things like that. I'm wondering why this kind of research isn't public, and I know these things aren't easy, right? And no one's going to expect we need 100% of people to understand the ad settings, right? But I mean, it's a journey, right? It's if one day you're at 70%, that's pretty good. But I think there's a work there that needs to kind of show progress towards a goal. And right now, that data isn't available for either company, so Facebook, Apple, or Google. And I'm wondering why that is and whether you plan on making that type of data public in the future. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. And also just to preface this with ad settings are depersonal. There's no personalized ads for minors under 18 globally from Google. So just to the ad settings are sometimes deactivated, but that's a global setting. To preface that. Second, to your point about why don't we make that research public, I wish that we did more of that, and that's part of the work from my center, is to be able to share more findings. You have to, I think of that as de-risking. Like I have to work on de-risking that process for the company, essentially, because when you're sharing a lot of internal information, people are worried. Maybe this is going to be presented in the wrong light and whatnot. So that's part of, I think, probably what the holdup is in some of those areas, but that's what we're working towards. So I'm de-risking internal processes to be able to share more. And if you think about starting from not sharing anything at all to where we are today, I'm feeling hopeful that we're on the right path. So,
thanks. The next question is just in front of just in front. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, I'm Madhu Mehta from Leiden University. So I always feel that the principle of informed consent is undermined for vulnerable groups of children. So maybe if in a house, everybody has a device, right? Kids use the device of the parent to enter into any website. They don't really read the terms and conditions. They just accept for any app purchases and they enter the website. So you were saying age verification is also a problem because age verification, uses a lot of personal data. As a company like Google, do you have any methods coming up to avoid this, for avoiding the vulnerable groups entering inside a website like that, which are not very age appropriate for the children?
So that's yes, but it's for the use case that you're describing, it's going to be really, really hard to do that. If it's a shared device that's logged in, let's say, under an adult account, there's no way in one session to be able to determine the age of that person. It's not possible technically to do that. What is possible and what Google is doing in some of these areas is that there is a model that is able to determine from usage behavior over time whether someone is an adult or a child, and then is able to block certain things. That is something, for example, I'll give you an example. If someone looks for a mortgage and wants to buy a house, it's unlikely that that's a child. That's an example. So inputs like this on usage behavior are being used to determine in a privacy-preserving way whether someone is an adult or a child. And those are some of the ways in which Google is trying to move those things forward.
Thank you. So our next question is just there, the white blazer.
Thank you. This has been a great panel so far, lots of practical advice. I'd like to go back to the conversation around political will. I've seen organizations where senior leaders have been very keen to engage with citizens at the very beginning, but once they see the results, once they hear what people have to say, they kind of want to back away from that, and they're reluctant to want to do anything with that information. I'm wondering if any of you have had experience with that and how you've dealt with that. And Clara, I'd be interested in hearing your perspective from the regulator as well, if you want to take your moderator hat off.
Thanks. Thank you also, Daphne, for asking that question, because that's one of the questions that didn't make the cut, but that we did want to talk about. So I think actually I'll refer back to Anja's point on de-risking, which is when we were looking at the work on biometrics, part of the conversation around de-risking is what are we going to do when people say things that we don't agree with? Because people have criticisms about the ICO, many of which are, of course, valid. And also, many people don't, whether or not they criticize the ICO, they have a different perspective on biometrics. And so it was important from the start of the project to say, no matter what the outcome is, we will publish it. So stay tuned, because it will be published later this year. And basically for us, it was around framing the comments. So we put out lots of guidance and statements which say, this is the ICO's position. But when we consult with individuals, we frame that conversation around, we had this conversation, these were the findings, and here they are reported, and then we can say at the end, this is not the ICO's position. To see more, you can read here, and here's how we're taking on board certain things, and here's why we're not taking on board other things. So to go back to Emma's point.
If I may add, because we see this a lot with governments, especially. And I think that there are two things that we are telling them to do. One is, if you institutionalize the process from the beginning and you set the rules that you are trying to, that you need to put in place for engage with civil society and citizens, that protects that the system at the end is going to work. For example, if you from the beginning said in a directive or even in a legal framework that all the discussions are going to be public, they're coming back on that is even worse for them than doing it. It can be more damaging not publishing the information or the discussion if they said it that they're going to do it at the beginning, that if they do it. And then the second part is communication from the public and from government, making public that these processes are taking place, the topics that are being discussed, because then when the process ends, people will start asking, okay, what are the results of these processes? What actually happened? And it happened recently with the Convention pour le Climat in France. There was a Convention for the Climat some people knew about it, others didn't know about it. There was a big silence after the convention until maybe a few months ago when they start publishing some of the results of this convention. That is, for example, banning all flights that you can get with maximum 2.5 hours of train. And this was some of proposition in the convention, and now they're implementing it. But just the fact that there was no communication at all for a long, long time, it start raising questions about the process and about actually the willingness of the government to implement some of the results and discussions of the convention. So I think that in this case, communication is key in order to take government accountable for the decision and the process.
I think probably Maria and Anja also have some things to add, but I think you'll have to find them over lunch. And thank you all very much for being such a fantastic panel. And if anyone else has any questions in the audience, I'm afraid you'll have to ask them over lunch. And thank you.